Let's all stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. President Daly here. Vice President Haldane here. Trustee Clements here. Trustee McDonald here. Trustee Parr here. Thank you. Welcome. We are meeting in the library tonight due to a technical difficulty in the auditorium, and we thank Celia and her team for the quick change up. And our next Board of Education meeting will be Tuesday, March 16th, 7 p.m. in the auditorium, and the workshop topic will be middle school detail report. And I will remind the board that we are scheduled to meet at 6 p.m. for an executive session that night to discuss two-year candidates. And a reminder to the public that anyone who is interested in Board of Education trustee seats, we have 2 seats up for election. And if you're interested, you need to get a packet, a petition packet, and you can get that from Ms. Platt, either by emailing her at cplatt@haldaneschool.org or stopping into the District Clerk office. If anyone has any questions about board service, everybody here at board table would be more than happy to share with you, answer questions, and encourage you to be a part of the board. And with that, I'll turn it over to
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Again, I want to echo your comments and thank you for the quick setup with our change of location this evening, so we can continue to provide a level of insight or transparency to our community by way of this recording on very short notice. I think we're coming upon a unique, what I'll call an inflection point in our response to current response to the COVID crisis on campus. And as you may have read, it was covered in the Durham News today that we are awaiting updated guidance from the New York State Department of Health that very well could have implications in our conversation of bringing more students back on campus before the end of the school year. So surrounding districts have announced that they're looking to bring more students back onto campus, really anytime between now and the end of spring break. And we haven't begun that dialogue yet here, but I do think it's going to be worthwhile for us to do so with no timeline attached to it, and a timeline that makes sense for us. What just an observation that I've made is that in other communities, there's a high level of parental pressure to bring more students back in. And I think that's been tempered here really in 2 parts. Just one, we were able to bring a lot of students back and for in-person instruction sooner than most. But 2, I think we've been really deliberate in communicating to our parents and to our staff the health and safety guidelines that will be in place, how we treat a variety of circumstances that may come up on campus. And I still feel a responsibility to make sure that we're doing that if we were to make any change in our practices here. So those are things that me and the administrative team will begin to set up so we can continue to make the decisions that make the best sense for Haldane and for Haldane students and our families and our staff over the course of the next few weeks. So you'll likely see more information coming from me on that in the days and the weeks ahead. In addition to that, I just wanted to make note that we did send our consent to test students, to screen students through a rapid test process home yesterday. We were a little delayed on that again with some weather and just getting that set up with some other things going on campus. So we did receive, as of today, 90 families had indicated their consent to test, which is great. We would like to see that number reach 800. So obviously the more students we're able to test, the better our testing process will be. And we see that as an important part of what's happening on campus. Subtle, but important part of what's happening on campus and maintaining a safe campus environment for the foreseeable future. So I just wanted to give the board an update on that. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions as it relates to COVID management. I don't have any other updates.
We're good.
Okay. So to start off, 2 budget presentations this evening. We're actually going to begin with the special education budget overview. So I'll ask Tara to come forward. And as you know, Tara described some elements of this, or many elements of the special education program and PPS program during her regular program update. So I've asked Tara just to focus on an overall cost structure for an anticipated cost structure for special education leading into next school year, with some overview just to familiarize ourselves or reorient ourselves back to the structure of the department and some of the associated costs. So Tara, if you want to come on up, I think we'll just situate you there. That's fine, yeah. Oh, good here.
Okay.
Bring the mic closer.
Sure. Just want to make sure I'm getting the mouse to work. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So as Dr. Benante said, I was here in January speaking to all of you about our programs, so I'll try to be brief in this presentation and not be too repetitive. But this is the overview of our budget and an outline of what pupil personnel services cover. So you can see here that within the department, it includes special education services, which is a big portion of pupil personnel services. Section 504, which is the accommodation plans for some students. School health services, home tutoring, and McKinney-Vento. I'm the McKinney-Vento liaison for the district, and just as a reminder, McKinney-Vento is the Homeless Assistance Act, so it provides supports for students who become homeless or are in temporary housing situations so that they don't have any gap in their education, so that they can continue with their schooling and their education and any services that they may be getting during that time. And this is an overview of the staff that is within the pupil personnel services department. Of course, the special education teachers, our related service providers. And when I say related service providers, I'm including speech language therapists, school psychologists, school social workers, occupational and physical therapists, our board certified behavior analyst. These are all members of our faculty that provide related services and therapies to our students. It also includes our school nurses, our school counselors, which are in the guidance department. And sorry, okay. And this is the school staff broken down by building. So a shift from last year, everything that we are doing within the special education department is all dependent on student need. So if you remember, some of you may remember we had 3 middle school special education teachers last year. We had a large number of students with IEPs enter the 9th grade this year, so we had to shift one of our special education teachers from the middle school to the high school. So it's really the only change that we've had here this year. And then this is the K through 12 shared staff. And this has not changed since last year. We still have the same number of staff. In terms of school psychologists, you see 1.6. And one of those school psychologists also acts as our CPSE chairperson, so that's the 0.6 position. Our school psychologists also do testing, and we have one school psychologist that's responsible for counseling in the middle school. So we kind of, they do overlap grade levels from K through 12, and we've arranged it in terms of their counseling needs at the different buildings. Okay. So these are our number of classified students. So Haldane services 112 students with disabilities or students with IEPs. Out of that 112, we have 11 students that are in out-of-district placements. And those out-of-district placements may include BOCES, They may include other school districts that have programs that we do not have here at Haldane, and New York State approved private day or private residential schools. We currently have 7 classified preschool students, and this number shifts very quickly. So we have, as students turn 3 years old, they become eligible for preschool services. For some students, it's even before 3 years old, students that are already in the early intervention program. So every month we could be getting new referrals for students that are turning 3, and that number fluctuates a lot. So there's 7 as of today. There may be, more or less as the months go by in the school year. 43 students have Section 504 accommodation plans. So these are students that may need special accommodations or modifications to their program or with their testing when they're taking tests, but they do not necessarily have any special education services. So they're not in any special classes or integrated co-teaching classes on an IEP. They're just receiving their accommodations. Okay. So this is the overall budget, what was projected, and the actual spending over the last 5 years. Now, this number is our total budget, so that includes salaries, benefits, BOCES and contracted services, materials and supplies, but it does not include PPS areas such as guidance, social work, health services, or the psychologists. So on this next slide, this is the actual cost for out-of-district placements. So for students who need specialized programs, this is the amount that was budgeted and the actual amount spent on those students who need to go to out-of-district placements. And it's important to note here that changes in numbers here and changes in what was budgeted can happen pretty frequently or easily based on students moving in and out of district. There's a certain amount of variability and movement within these numbers, these projected numbers, and what the actual spending is. And at times, student needs change as well. So we may need to add a one-to-one aid for a student that's in an out-of-district placement, or maybe they no longer need an aid, and then that's taken off of the IEP. So those numbers can be impacted by just 1 or 2 students. They're very variable.
And I think you mentioned this, sorry to interrupt, but that is a component of the previous slide.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
This slide represents the number of students in out-of-district programs. For this year, I separated out, we have 8 students that we are financially responsible for. So that is 8 students that we're paying out-of-district tuition for. We do have 3 additional students that were responsible for their CSE meetings and responsible for implementing their IEP, but that those are garrison students. So there are instances where we may have students that are placed out of district, but we're not financially responsible for them. So this year I included examples of what the tuition rates are for out-of-district placements where we currently have students placed. At any time, there could be another school listed here or another program listed here based, again, on student need. So as you can see, there's quite a range of tuition costs for out-of-district placements. And on the top row there, you see Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, either center-based programs at their Yorktown campus or district-based programs range from $54,000 to $71,000, but that does not include aids or related services. So I listed the actual tuition rates that we're paying for some of these students once you calculate the services that those students need to progress academically. The other programs that are listed there, Westchester School for Exceptional Children, the Center for Discovery, and green chimneys, those numbers are inclusive of all special services or related services.
And some of these schools are residential as well.
Center
right?
for Discovery is predominantly a residential
That's right.
school.
Right.
Okay, and just in terms of final thoughts, I just wanted to mention again that in a small district such as Haldane, 1 or 2 students moving into the district or out of the district or needing a change in placement can impact those budget numbers pretty significantly. In addition, the district and department is always considering ways to mitigate costs, but what always comes first is the needs of our students. So those decisions are always made at CSE meetings. And while we are looking for ways to creatively cut costs and still meet student needs. While some students may need a specialized program that is offered out of district, we still strive to meet the needs of our students in an integrated setting whenever possible. We try to include our students in our integrated co-teaching model here as much as possible, and the majority of our students are receiving those students here at Haldane. And that is all. Any questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about, a few years ago, we developed a consortium with Putt Valley and Garrison, I believe, and Haldane and the 3 schools to help each other out, manage costs, take students in when it made sense. Can you talk a little bit about the success of that? Are we currently using that? Is it
We're
working?
not currently using it because what was happening is that we were utilizing the services of, it was Garrison and Putt Valley were the other 2 districts, and we were using the services for Putt Valley much more frequently than they needed our services or Garrisons because we're so small. So they tended to have most of the programs. So it dissolved after in time. We no longer used the consortium.
I just have a question. Do you anticipate or think that there will be many cases in which parents will be approaching looking for any programming that they have missed in this year or looking for extra support because of COVID-19, anything? Are those conversations ongoing, and does the staffing for next year, as we think about it, look to cover those kinds of extra sort of requests and things?
So there is talk about will some students need compensatory services?
Right.
So typically, if there were services that weren't offered on the IEP for one reason or another, if we were unable to provide students, for example, with the number of speech therapy
Right.
sessions that they were supposed to get, or if we were unable to provide them with a resource room because we were closed, we could be looking at offering compensatory services. But what that's the deciding factor there is whether or not students are progressing towards their IEP goals. So that's what's looked at, and compensatory services are only offered in an effort to get those students to reach their goals. So it may not be number for number. It may not be, oh, you missed 5 speech and language therapy sessions because we were unable to provide you with the speech and language therapist, so we're going to offer you 5 sessions. It doesn't work that way. It works more in terms of the CSE deciding how many sessions that student would need in order to meet their goals. Here, we're in a really good place. I was talking to Dr. Benante about this recently because we allowed all of our students with IEPs to come on campus. So I know that in other districts, they were unable to do that because of the size of the district. So some of the districts could only offer students coming back, for example, in their special classes. So if they had students in a 12-1-1, for example, special class, or a 6-1-2, which is the ratio of students to teachers to aides, they were able to bring them back. But, for example, maybe they weren't able to bring students back who only had resource room or only had an integrated co-teaching class. Here at Haldane, we were able to have students or offer students with IEPs to come back every day. So that puts us in a good position of A, having our students' needs met and their goals met on their IEPs, and B, we don't anticipate a need for very many compensatory services.
One more last quick question. And so this is not the year to be considering this in general, but I think it's useful to know the information because it's come up by members of the public a number of times. If there were a move to provide subject level support at the middle school level, what would be the rough increase in staff that would be required to do that?
So that would be for science and social studies classes for 6th, 7th, and 8th. Maybe one special education teacher, an additional special education teacher needed for, well, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you, considering they would teach 5 periods and then a 6th period assignment.
Yeah, in its most straightforward way, it would be one, but then remember,
Yes.
that's now giving that person 5 different, potentially 6 different subject areas to prep for, which would be very unique. So, you know, there's some inefficiencies, obviously, that come with that. I think we would prefer almost to hire, you know, if we were to ever do it, 2 to allow them to focus and then try to combine it with other areas of support that would be necessary, just so you're not giving that person as many preps, as we would call it, to, you know, to go across those 6 different subject areas.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara.
Thanks.
Can I have the clicker?
Pass the clicker. Hot potato.
Oh, we're all going to pass it down. This is great. Hot potato.
Hot potato, clicker.
Thank you. Just bear with me. I have to do this. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Okay. If I may?
Please.
So, and I'll try to, John, if you don't mind. Thank you. I'll just scoot just a little bit for the camera. Okay. Thanks so much. In addition to Tara's presentation, we wanted to provide the board with an overview of where we see ourselves currently in the budget, the entire budget development process for the upcoming school year. And as Ann and I have been working on these materials, we realized that by this point last year, interestingly, with everything that was going on, we actually, at this meeting last year, presented a budget to the board for consideration, and we are not close to being in a position to do that right now. So I will come to that at the end, an adjusted timeline for ourselves, while still hopefully being respectful of the time that the board would need to solicit community input and to deliberate before adopting a budget to put before the community. So that will come at the end. But I just think it does demonstrate the difference, how much a difference a year can make in a budget development process. And those of you who've been on the board for some time have had years like that, and this is certainly one of them. So just a few considerations to start. This process is presenting its own unique challenges. I've referred to some of these in previous meetings. The allowable growth factor, which I believe we spoke of last meeting, which is at 1.2%, does really limit now our ability to levy at a level that we have traditionally done in the past. So we're looking now and charged with examining how we can best reduce expenditures, but while still honoring what we provide to our kids and balancing that. And we'll get into some numbers in a moment. As you're well aware, as daily news now, is what's going to happen with the federal stimulus package and what impact will that have on school funding in New York State. And it may help us, but keep in mind the federal stimulus monies that have already come in somewhat to the district have been offset by reductions in aid that's been provided. So those aren't necessarily stimulus monies that are making its way to its school. So there's the potential something like that could play out in how the monies are distributed to the schools. Our hope, I think there's a level of scrutiny over that now, so my hope is that it wouldn't be. But just in listening to some reports from this weekend, there's the high probability that these monies are going to be earmarked for certain things. And those needs may not line up with what our needs are, or I should say those earmarks may not line up with what our needs are. So that may not necessarily help us. And we can't really we're at the point where we can't rely on that figure or whatever those figures are going to be in holding up or in that can't prevent us from moving forward with the budget development process with what we know now. The timeline is too short. We need to proceed as if with some assumptions in mind, and I'll point those out as we go through this evening. So when we spoke back in late December or early January, we discussed the parameters for budget development. The board has, I think, realized the need to levy up to the levy limit or develop a budget up to the levy limit. Obviously, we're trying to keep the main thing, as I've said before, in focusing on our coherence plan and our objectives for our students and other program areas. And, played with the wording here because I heard the feedback from the board. A previous parameter that we've established is to maintain all existing programs, but I heard clearly from the board, we don't want that to be a limitation within the budget development process. So I think a better way to frame this is to consider program decisions through the lens of what Haldane students may need to realize the district's mission. So that allows us on an administrative end to adjust or adapt or re-examine program areas if we think that it's going to best help our students reach the Haldane essentials or other goals that they may have for post-Haldane life, whether that be secondary studies or career. And we appreciate that flexibility because I do think, especially when there's constraints on your budget, you really have to rethink and re-examine how you're approaching the work that you do with kids in certain areas. So that certainly is the case this year, or will be. So just a refresher regarding the property tax cap. The tax cap does limit the total levy that's set by schools and local governments. So our property tax cap this year, as you take that, the adjustment that's made is 1.88%. And you may recall from last year we were north of 3% as a levy limit. So we use that, or we incorporate the property tax cap into our budget. And that, in the way we've approached it this year, has developed the ceiling. So we're starting from this place that when we take the tax cap and incorporate that into what we levied last year, along with our anticipated revenues, state aid, the revenues that the district receives, we can establish the ceiling for budget development. And let's work now from that ceiling to what we know we can actually, what we know about our expenses and where those expenses are. So I just want to illustrate that in the next few slides. So we have our total budget from the 2020-2021 school year. It was $25.2 million. And we know going into the 21-22 school year that our total budget will be $25.6 million. And again, that's the ceiling that I'm referring to. That reflects a budget-to-budget increase of $390,000. And as you work your way down, a levy increase of approximately $386,000, which would be a 1.88% levy increase. So again, this would be the ceiling for us in budget development. We're trying to eliminate kind of the notion of a rollover budget, but for just illustration's sake, if we look at what we're spending right now, and if we were to use that as a basis for our spending next year, it would cost us $26.8 million to run everything exactly the way we're running it right now, again next year. Again, our estimated revenue is 25.6, so this creates a $1.2 million deficit from if we were to look to continue everything we're doing now in the exact same way into next year. And again, just to summarize our revenue, we receive about, or scheduled to receive about $3 million in state aid. And again, this is already based on assumption. Our aid estimate is already based on an assumption that New York State's going to receive $6 billion in federal aid in the stimulus package that has not yet passed. So that's another key part of all this. Some folks are saying, well, you're going to get more stimulus money. This is already incorporating a certain level of stimulus funding into our aid estimates. Other revenue at $800,000, again, tuition that we draw mostly from Garrison for the students that come to us. We've maintained a fairly consistent level of fund balance. I also think this is a really important note that we is easily lost sight of. But in each year's budget development, that helps us offset any potential deficit that we may have. Some districts set this right at zero from the start and then work from there in their budget development process. We have applied around the same amount each year in budget development. And again, we have a certain amount of reserve funding that we can apply along with the levy that's estimated to be at $20.9 million. So as a school district that is not as dependent on state aid as other districts, it's all relative, obviously, but even if we were to get additional aid from the state, it's not going to be at the same, at a very high level, because we're already starting from a place of a relatively low level of state aid support. So the more federal monies that come in, I just think the higher potential for those monies to go to higher needs districts. We are not, in comparison, considered to be a high needs district. So that's where that levy limit factor is going to impact us and districts that are more dependent on the local tax levy more so than it may impact another district that is less dependent on levy and more dependent on state aid. So there's a yin and a yang to that each year. So we've begun to examine areas for cost reduction and savings for the upcoming school year. Just on a very preliminary basis, there's usually some things that stand out right away that we can say, okay, these are adjustments that we can make to further offset our deficit. And there are a few that have come up this year already in preparation for next year under debt consolidation, program consolidation, and then other savings that we would expect to incur through staff turnover. And I just want to speak to those for a moment here. We had a mid-year retirement this year. Whenever we have a retirement or a resignation for that matter, we look at whether or not there will be breakage, meaning the difference between what we were paying that individual and then what we would bring in, the cost that we would likely hire someone to come back into that position. So as a teacher who retires with 20 or 30 years experience is making a lot more than a teacher who's coming in with no years of experience and starting at the first level on the salary schedule. So we would anticipate, due to a retirement at the elementary school level, approximately $60,000 in breakage, and the difference between what we were paying that individual and how we were budgeting for that position versus what we would budget should we fill that position next school year. What's up for discussion always whenever we have a staff member leave is, do we need to fill the position? Is that an essential component for the school to operate next school year? We're not at that point yet. We are, from a planning perspective, of at least being able to assume that there's going to be at least a level of breakage. And then obviously we're getting to a point where we'll examine how many teachers do we need to run each program that we offer. We also had a retirement in special education. So again, there's a level of anticipated breakage there. We hired at the beginning of the school year, this was an important move that we made, 2 interventionists to work with elementary age students, and that's been going very well. But we also hired those individuals with the notion that these were going to be short-term hires, short-term being 1 year, that we were applying a level of money from fund balance from last school year into the budget to do this school year, but it was not with the notion of that becoming a long-term position. So again, we can incorporate removing those 2 positions or eliminating those 2 positions at the end of the year.
Can I ask a quick question? And that was to support the students that were primarily remote.
Correct.
In the K-8.
K3.
K3.
Yep.
Okay.
Is how we
K3.
structured that.
Sorry, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, yes, thanks.
We had a high school guidance counselor transition, as you're aware of, so again, there's a level of breakage there. As Tara shared this evening in our special ed placements and the variability along with that, as it stands right now, we're anticipating that the placement cost for out-of-district students next year, or BOCES placed students next year, is going to increase by about $92,000. And I'm always candid with this, but it bears repeating that this is a figure that could change all the way up to and through the first day of school. So if we're going to have a little bit of a buffer somewhere, usually it's there. It's not a bad place, but as of right now, we do anticipate an increase in that area. every year we go back through line by line in the budget just to see if there's areas that we can make further adjustments. So we've realized already that we budget at a level that we don't need to maintain for credits that our teachers would accrue and that we would pay out for credits that our teachers accrue through professional learning. We still have a budget line there. This isn't eliminating it. We were just budgeting at a level that was beyond what realistically we were spending each year there. So that's the adjustment that you see there. Luckily, the teachers' retirement system, we make some in our initial projections. We use an estimate. As those estimates become actual, we're at a place this year where we realized it's going to offset what we were projecting to spend in that area to an amount. That's good, or that's in our favor. And then, as Anna's mentioned, we've refinanced some debt that has allowed us to save, or will allow us to save some additional money into next school year. So with all of these adjustments initially made, and again, I consider these very surface level, they're not controversial, or shouldn't be, I guess. That's $364,000. Again, that comes off of what we were, of our deficit that we were anticipating would all things remain the same. So we're at a point, and the mindset is the budget we have developed in process right now would cost the district $26.5 million. Our target budget is $25.6 million. So it's around $840,000 deficit, for lack of a better term, that we need to address through the development process over these next few weeks. Now, just a figure that I like to share with the board, because I think it's important in our demonstration to the community that we always are demonstrating that we're balancing academic excellence, program excellence, and being really mindful about what we're trying to create for our students against cost, because people pay a lot of money to fund our school district. So in years past, I've demonstrated this as a county-wide figure. But, as I continue to tweak and modify, I say, we're really not like Carmel. We're really not like Mayapack. Those districts in Brewster, those districts profile very differently than us. We're similar to Putt Valley in some ways, but there's other districts that we profile in terms of our district enrollment, in terms of the number of low-income students who attend our schools, as well as a figure I'll use sometimes, the combined wealth ratio, meaning the relative wealth in the community as a point of comparison. And the state collects this information, and you'll never get it where it's apples to apples. You're just trying to generalize to a point where you're looking at districts that are similar to yours. So the comparison group that I'm showing here includes Garrison, and I'll say Garrison is a sister school in many ways, but they really don't profile, if you were just to look at Garrison as compared to Haldane. But I can't speak of similar schools and not mention Garrison because their kids come to us. So we are in many ways an interconnected community. So putting Garrison aside, Millbrook up in Dutchess County, North Salem in Westchester, Putt Valley, Rhinebeck, again, up in the northern part of Dutchess County, Spack-and-Kill, which is right in the town of Poughkeepsie, up Route 9 there, Tuckahoe and Valhalla, have more similarities with us than looking at our county-wide or other school districts in our county. Again, district enrollments may vary by a couple of hundred. Free and reduced lunch population may vary a little bit, and the wealth ratio may vary, but generally I would consider these are more of our peers. And when we look at spending and get down to a per pupil cost across these districts, again, we profile, whether you look at it at a county level or you look at it in our peer group across 3 counties, our per pupil expenditure is lower, or the lowest of these 10 school districts. So I just think it demonstrates to our community that we are very prudent with how we spend our money. And again, I've used this to justify in the past, while when we should go up to the levy limit. I really think that's important. I do think, especially when you're in times like these, had we not gone to the levy limit last year, it would just put that much more pressure on us this year to try to resolve a gap. I just wanted to use this for illustration's sake. And there's some other comparisons that I'll use out of this peer group in lieu of looking at the county-wide measures that I've used in the past, just because I think these districts profile a little more similar to Haldane than some of the other districts across the county. Okay, just bear with me. So it does raise the question, and I've heard it before, well, what if we go over the tax levy limit? What if, it's 1.8, but you don't have to levy only at 1.8? You could go above that, and that's true. Most places don't and haven't unless it was of real necessity. Personally, I think the administration would see that as something that for the board to decide, because you're connected to the community and what you would feel the community could support. So we just want to frame this as an if-then chart. If the district does propose a budget above the tax levy limit, remember, by law, the budget doesn't have to pass by a simple majority. It has to pass by 60%. There is a different set of rules that are applied if you're looking to go above the levy limit. If that budget does not pass, now we're put in the position to either revote, so we can modify the budget to a level that we think the community would support, and we can put that back out to the community to vote, a few weeks later in June. So we would have to have a second budget vote. Or we can move directly to a contingency budget, which is an extreme. If you're looking to go over the levy limit and now it doesn't pass and you move directly to contingency, that's a pretty extreme measure. That sets the tax rate at 0. Which for us would result in an additional $386,000 in reduction. So I put it here just for the board's consideration in case you had questions about some of the particulars as it relates to the tax levy limit should the district want to proceed down a path of going beyond our levy limit this school year. So as I mentioned at the start, we do have a revised budget timeline that we're going to follow. First of all, from just a business perspective, on March 16th, we do our pre-budget hearing where we establish the annual meeting and some particulars related to that. So that's currently on the calendar. There's no reason why we can't do that at our next meeting. The administration, in lieu of obviously presenting a budget for the board's consideration tonight, we're targeting April 6th as the date that we would present a budget recommendation to the board for your consideration, using meetings between now and then to keep you apprised of what's going on in budget development. So we'd like to provide you with as much information prior to April 6th so there's no surprises. But again, we are on a bit of a shortened timeline here. We don't know what's going to play out with additional state monies. So there may be the need, I think as Margaret mentioned at our last meeting, we may need to consider having a meeting in between just to keep you fully apprised of what's going on and to get your feedback, quite honestly. So we've used April 13th as well as another special meeting date if needed. We've put that in. April 20th is the date the board needs to be mindful of because that is the date that we have to adopt a budget to provide enough notice to our community as it relates to the details of it. May 4th is our scheduled public hearing. As you know, between those times, we're often out meeting with our constituencies and respective school groups, informing them of what the budget entails. And as of now, May 18th is the budget vote.
And these dates are all set in stone at this point, even if something drastic changes on the state level or the federal level and our funding comes in, doesn't come in, these dates are still set in stone
Yeah,
regardless.
There's no indication right now that anything's going to change in terms of our timeline. Yeah. And usually we get a little heads up on that. Like last year is a good example. We had, certainly we're aware that things were percolating, that school budget vote was going to get delayed. But no, there's none of that right now. No. The only date that I'd say variable is the special meeting. You can decide whenever with due notice that we want to have another board meeting at any point. But no, our hard deadline is going to be the 18th and then April 20th to adopt and May 18th to vote.
are opening this up for questions.
Yes,
from the
yes,
board
so
at
that's,
this point. But also this, this is the first time really that the full board is seeing all of this data. So you're not looking for, brainstorming from the
No,
board about
no.
like what to cut or what not
No.
to cut. That's not what this discussion is.
Nope.
This is just questions about the information that's been
The
presented.
information that's presented, obviously, it's, it's open floor at this point, so, thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Actually, I think one other thing, and it makes sense that they aren't on the formal budget development calendar, but I think we probably just want to let the public know that I assume, anticipate engaging in the kinds of public conversations or conversations with the public like we did last year. I think those
Yes.
aren't scheduled yet, but
Not yet.
those will be a really important piece
Yeah.
of this.
They are. And I feel it's important when we start to schedule those. A lot's going to happen very quickly now. We know as an administration that we have a lot that we have to dig into. And the sooner we start to really wrap our heads around what needs to be addressed and in what way and have some consensus among our leadership team with that, we'll start talking to people about it because we realize that at the current level of deficit, it's going to impact every school in some way. Our goal is obviously to develop a budget that we're not significantly impacting the student experience here. We have to really just re-examine how we're approaching our work in certain areas. And I can say there's some things that stand out that I think are not going to cause much disruption by any means to a school, but it still allow us to offset our budget deficit. But they're, $800,000 is a lot, so they're very well. We're just not quite that far down the road in our own thinking yet to really get a sense of how far we may need to go to resolve that budget deficit. But once we have more certainty around that, we'll start scheduling those meetings.
I just wanted to, I don't know if it's really a question or more just a clarifying statement, but one of our biggest revenues, as you mentioned, is tuition.
Yes.
And mostly from the Garrison School District.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, I understand that we use the Seneca Falls tuition rate and that is a set rate that we don't change ever. It changes, there's a formula for it and it may change based on like the CPI and with building aid, whatever else is mixed in there. But it's not something that we have any control over. Is that
accurate.
correct?
Ann, is there anything in addition to that you wanted to add?
We don't, we can't change the Seneca Falls rate, but that is not what we charge Garrison.
We
Oh, I
charge
see.
Garrison, we have an agreement with Garrison to charge a reduced rate from the Seneca Falls rate. Yeah.
I see. And that is an agreement that is just in perpetuity. Is that correct? So what we charge them for tuition is set in stone? Is that something that shifts?
No, that's an annual agreement, I believe, that we make with the school district.
Correct. It's a separate contract that is, there's two variables that we apply for an increase, an annual increase. And it's based on when our tax rate increases or budget to budget. And I don't know who started that. It was here when I came here. And that's how we calculated the Garrison tuition. All along, I don't even know that there's been conversation about going to the Seneca Falls rate, which is a bit higher. Not, it's not a huge variance, but it is a discounted rate because of the arrangement between us.
I see.
However, you bring up a good point, Jen, that if that's something, I think we're at this point where the board may have certain areas or questions around revenue streams or costs. If you would like us to provide an overview of what those entail, That's obviously our responsibility to do that. So that's something we can look up and make sure the particulars as it relates to it are provided to the board at our next meeting.
Yeah, I was just curious. For some reason, I thought it was the Seneca Falls rate, but I might have just been remembering that it was related to the Seneca Falls rate, but not it exactly. But I think that's interesting, you know, as we look at all of our revenue streams, I just
Mhm.
making sure we know what they all are.
And you said that if we did everything we're doing this year, you know, the rollover cost would be X.
Mhm.
I assume then, are we planning with the same health and safety precautions in place for the fall as we were this year? So that's added, that's included in the cost?
Generally, yes. And what we're implementing from a health and safety perspective, there's continual costs that we, from a disinfecting and cleaning and some overtime that we pay, that is incorporated into our projections for next school year. A more significant variable would be what model of instruction are we providing for kids, and how does that influence, or how may it influence, our costs in other areas. So as an example, if we're able to position ourselves next year where all of our high school kids can come in every day, that's going to have an implication on cleaning schedules, cleaning routines, and such that that we have to account for. On one note, though, that's where actually additional federal stimulus money that are one-time monies can actually help. Because if we have to put a HEPA filter, air circulation unit in every classroom, that's a one-time cost. So from a health and safety perspective, it helps. But we hopefully only have to purchase that one time. It's not something we have to budget for in successive years. So those are the types of things that I'm paying attention to. If we do have extra federal money or state money, by way of the federal money coming into the state, that could help us in offsetting some of the costs that we may incur from having more kids come onto campus next year.
Just a very quick observation, which was, if we had the same per student as just the next person in line, not the top, just the next person in line,
Fine.
that would be another $800,000. So that's,
We think alike when it comes to that.
Yeah, no,
It's
I
true.
knew you were there.
It's true.
The second question I had was, does the budget in process, as you're describing it, for next year include projected 4% that you would then roll to the following year?
I think Ann, remind me, is it our rollover include our projected fund balance of 4%? Or was it I feel like we were at 3.
So, I guess the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Because we have our 4% fund balance each year.
Yep.
Because best practice is to only spend about 95% of your budget,
Right.
so that you have your 4% for anything that might happen. So yes, I don't budget with the 4% in mind, but because it's a rollover and that's what we
Yep.
usually enjoy, I guess, at the end of the
Yeah,
year, then I would think that it would be still built in there.
What?
I'd like to have this is not the forum to have this conversation, but I'd like to have a longer term strategic conversation about the value of continuing to carry over 4%.
Sure. Just a quick follow-up question for Ann on that, but Peggy,
Well, I actually wanted, I mean, I realize you want to have a longer conversation, but I had in mind to address it directly. In a school district this small, I think that 4% fund balance is extremely important for the kinds of reasons that Tara laid out in her conversation, that you can have a student with special needs come into the district and you can immediately incur a $100,000 cost, or something like what happened with COVID last year, these unanticipated these unanticipated needs. So anyway, I understand that you want to have a longer conversation, but I was about to just say that anyway.
I totally agree with you don't want a budget to spend everything, but I think in a situation where CPI has been artificially deflated this past year, given frankly the fact that so many people are out of jobs and there wasn't any inflation, so right, and therefore our tax levy is reduced. And I understand the unexpected one-time bumps. I'd like to if there were time to consider, rather than making programmatic cuts, if there were time to consider using some of our rainy day fund, I think this would be a good time to consider that.
Right. Now, and can you describe, we talked about this at one point together, what if we were to say that we were only going to carry a 2% balance into next year's budget? I thought we got, you at one point explained to me what that could create in the following year when we're developing a budget a year later? Or am I misremembering?
I think that our discussion had to do with the $645,000 appropriated fund balance.
Yes.
That's in addition to the 4% that we have, and, you know, every year I get on my soapbox and I say that I want to reduce that. And that's a revenue plug that luckily we haven't tapped into. But knowing that if in any one year your fund balance, your available fund balance, which includes your unappropriated 4% and your appropriated 645,000 drop below, you've used it. And that's like a savings account. Once you use it, it doesn't get replenished because it's a non-recurring revenue. So if you drop to the 2%, even, you know, you keep the 645,000 intact, and you drop from 4% to 2%, then it's gone. So you'd have to, you know, have a multi-year plan, because then you've reduced your budget. You're using perhaps 97% of your budget. I would describe it as being in a red zone. That would be danger, because $800,000 in the grand scheme of things, if something were to happen, isn't a lot of money. So, and then how would you get that back? Because the plan doesn't appear that we're going to be getting more state aid anytime soon. We're already owed, you know, if we were on that formula for foundation aid, we're $6 million behind on that. That's, you know, that's not gonna, realistically, not gonna come to us.
So, totally, I'd love to see something on paper. Just like implication, like, I understand we carry 4, I understand we have 3, right? We got 7 carry, like, what do we do? Like, how do we think about that?
It sounds like maybe a follow-up at our next meeting, or even just in a Friday report, that the board might want to see some accounting of our reserves. Exactly what do we have in there? What different reserves do we have, right? Because there are different reserves that we can use for different things. Which ones do we need voter approval for? Which ones do we not?
And
what happens if we use the 4%? You know, just
that's a very good.
if we could have a little like reserves review. It sounds like this year might be a good year to have that review.
And an if-then, like the chart before.
I think the point you bring up, Ann, is a very good one. Like, my understanding of, I would love to, so if anything is used, what's the opportunity, or is there any, to rebuild it? Is it like a piggy bank where you put money back, you use it one year and you put money back? Like, you don't need to tell me now, but like, how does, because we do end up, never mind, I won't, like, we do end.
It sounds like, if I'll just bring this
Yeah,
together
thank
and
you.
say, this is a special year that may require special circumstances and special action, right? Things that we don't normally do. We never touch our reserves. Anne has drilled that into us. We don't go above the tax levy. That has been drilled into us. We don't cut programs. Those are all the things we never do. However, this year, $1.2 million deficit, gulp, we might have to consider things out of the ordinary, and we just want to make sure we know how to consider all of those things.
As we're throwing things on a revenue expense like projection to consider, if there's any visibility to, I don't know how to ask this appropriately, so I'll just ask it. Any visibility to future retirements and breakage over and above the expected, or if there's a bubble class of teachers that we would expect to retire next year, or are we in a drought for the next 5 years? And our normal 1 to 2 breakage is, I know that's trying to read into people's heads, but
You can look at your staff snapshot and anticipate, once, there's key metrics,
Yeah,
obviously,
but
that
would be useful.
are relevant when you're thinking about a retirement. You're looking for when people are 55 years old and they have a certain number of years of service, so to make them eligible. So we can look into that and demonstrate, if there is any class or
Anything-
bubble, if you
anything
will,
aberrant, anything aberrant.
anticipated. The retirement incentive piece, that would come more from the state. Again, we could put something out there, but it wouldn't even compare to what the state could offer in terms of and there are some bills that are out there that are attached to this, allowing individuals who are not yet 55 the ability to retire in the system, because you can until you're 55. So that would be a significant incentive that the state could offer right now. And one of our local legislators has a bill proposing just that. And if there were ever a time, now would really be a good time to do that, because I think there's a lot of folks who are stressed and ready to maybe perhaps move on to what's next for them in their
That's
lives.
how
I don't know for Haldane, I just mean in general.
That's how my dad retired from
yeah.
the federal government. They put out early buyout
Yeah,
package, and he
yeah,
was like,
so-
I'll take one.
Yeah, now would be a time for that. So that obviously is a little more outside of our control.
Yep.
But I think we have some good, what I've heard from the board, the fund balance discussion is something that we'll try our best to illustrate the dynamic, that if we do this, then this is what the board has to be prepared to consider may occur, how shifting that allocation influences the budget and accounting of our reserves as well, and then the follow-up item just on the garrison contract, which I want to make sure the board has accurate information.
I know nobody has a crystal ball. Some people probably have better understanding of the longer-term economic forecasts than I do, but I'm not personally, and again, with some background knowledge, I don't know how smart it would be for us to assume that this is a special, unique year that isn't going to repeat itself for potentially another year or in another few years. I mean, I think, as optimistic as I think we do all want to be about the pandemic, there are still a lot of uncertainties about what's going on that could continue to have. I mean, that's just one thing I want to throw out there. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the sense among people that know more than I do is that this is a very particular, unique year. I haven't seen a lot of evidence to make me feel confident about that yet. So I think that's just another thing I wanted to throw in. It's certainly unique compared to what's happened in the past. I'm curious how confident we can be about it's a very particular, unique year in terms of the next, 2 to 5 years or.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Peggy, too, about when we look back to a time where there was great fiscal stress, being in the mid-2000s after the housing bubble. There were some districts that approached that as a 1-year issue, which turned into a 5-year issue or longer. It caught up with them. So, you can only, at times when you have to examine your spending and expenditures and sometimes not taking the short-term pain only leads to a longer, bigger pain that is felt at some point. So we just want to be mindful of that. And I do think as we work as an administration, there's some areas that we're going to see, look, we can still maintain a high quality experience for our kids, and we can spend less in this area. And it just makes sense to do so. The kids aren't losing anything by perhaps, making a reduction here or there. I think we'll see a few areas that stand out. I don't think it'll get us all the way to $800,000, but I do think that there'll be a couple of areas that jump out with us, and I think we need to be prudent there, and then we need to be creative in the other areas, because to the extent that we can be, all things considered. So obviously, we're going to work to put more concrete program-specific administration. I wrote to the staff today. I said, this is going to transcend every department. As an administration, we need to re-examine how we've organized and are spending our money in administration. We need to look at it in instruction. We're going to need to look at it in maintenance and operation. We're going to need to look at it in every area of our district. It's just one of those situations that can be a good thing. We could there could be an opportunity in there that we hadn't considered, because our stretching is going to be stretched or our thinking is going to be stretched a little bit more than it usually is as it relates to those things. And then we'll look at also the budget and the financing and some of our strategies that we've applied in the past to see if there's any adjustments that could be made there. I feel strongly we're going to be okay. We're going to be operating a school district next year. We're still going to be a high performing school district that's doing really well by kids, but we have to manage these next 6 weeks really well to keep us on good footing going into next year, and not creating a situation that just causes us more pain a year from now. And I think as it relates to COVID, we did that. We made some really tough decisions in August and September, but they served us well in January, February, and March. It's the same thing. We got to make some tough decisions in these next 6 weeks, but I do think that they'll serve us well in 21, 22, 22, 23, depending on what plays out in those years as well. So we'll work through it together.
Okay. I think we can move on. Is everyone okay moving on? Yeah. Is there any communication from the public? No. Information reports are here for the board and public's review. Going into consent agenda minutes, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
These are the minutes from our February 23rd meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Consent agenda financial, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Consent agenda personnel, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Now to the exciting part of our meeting, new business, our Haldane Central School District calendar for the 2021-22 school year. This is a draft. It's not requiring our action tonight. Dr. Benante, is there anything you want to point out?
There's some, early on in the school year, some holidays that line up that create some unique constraints on our first week or two of school. So you'll see in the draft calendar that we're actually proposing starting with staff on August 31st for a conference day, as well as September 1st, so we can bring students in for 2 days that first week. To us, it doesn't make the most sense to bring students in only for a day, and then and that would be if we didn't do the conference day on the 31st. However, more relevant is that this calendar was developed with the assumption that we will not have the ability to make snow days all remote days, which is still, the state's still weighing its options there. So when we have some finality as to whether or not that will be a tool we can use for next year, I say it's a tool because it allows us to keep a continuity of instruction in the event that we have a couple inches of snow on the ground. We might make some adaptations to the calendar for the board to consider again, but for now, we feel like it's important to put it before the board because we don't know if we'll have a resolution to that, and put it out to the community, obviously, for feedback and for potential adoption later on. If we need to adapt it a little bit in the summer, it will only err, I think, in the favor of our families and our kids. It won't be in a way that would cause any disruption.
I see Juneteenth is on here. This
Yes.
is the first time that's, and that's being dictated by the state? They're
Correct.
adding it across in all states?
Yeah, so depending on where Juneteenth falls, it has to be, if it falls on a Sunday, you have to recognize it on a Monday. If it falls on a Saturday, you do not have to recognize it on the Friday before.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah, so this year, actually, that's what occurs this year for us, if I'm not mistaken. But no, it is by law, that is now a school holiday.
So going forward, it's always going to be part of the school calendar unless it falls on a Saturday?
Unless it falls on a Saturday. Correct. It would not impact us. And I believe this
Interesting.
year it falls on a Saturday, and that's why. So that actually puts another constraint, right? You develop a calendar knowing where all the holidays are, and then a new holiday is up. So that's one less day of instruction, like kids that we can schedule in. So again, in the development process of the calendar, that was another unique element to plan around. It also impacts Regents' schedule at the end of the year as well. Right. No.
And just for the board's note, this is a calendar that's been worked on by the calendar committee, that's been approved by them. So this has already made the rounds of all the real powers that be. And we will have it to vote on, I believe, next week, or next meeting. So if anybody has any questions in between now and our next meeting is the time to share them with Dr. Benante. Any other comments about the calendar? Okay, any communication from the public? Any board reflections? I will just share that I attended the comprehensive plan community presentation this week, as did Sean. And I encourage everyone, let's see, it's www.phillipstown2020.org is the website to read the plan. I believe there is another webinar presentation this weekend. If anybody's interested, it is in draft form. As we all know, having gone through a strategic coherence planning process, it is a lot of work to bring people together and create a vision and a plan. And I certainly commend those in our town who have done that for our Phillipstown. And there's a lot of interesting information in there. So I will direct the public and the board to check it out if they get a chance.
I would just note, I was talking to a woman that I work with today. We were on Zoom, of course, because that's how we live our lives. And we were in a meeting and somebody said her name and she didn't respond. So she was on mute and she was like, oh, sorry, I was talking to my son. And so we had our one-on-one immediately afterwards. I'm like, how are things going? What's going on? She's down in Westchester someplace. And she said, well, it's actually great. This is the first day we've had synchronous learning. And I'm like, oh my God, we're so lucky. and he's at home too. He's in 2 days and he's home 2 days. And I'm like, it's just fantastic. It's a real commendation to the entire district. So
Thanks.
Dr. Benante, any final thoughts to share?
No final thoughts. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your patience and flexibility this evening.
Thank you, Celia. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.